Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding of the fascinating world of chess. I am your host, George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-159 of the McKay Campus School at the university. And with me today at our Fitchburg Access Television Production Center in the control room is our award-winning director, Darren Dame of Fitchburg, assisted by another Fitchburg resident, a two-time Wachusett Chess Club champion, Bruce Felton, who will be cueing the moves. And behind the camera is our longtime Wachusett Chess Club member, Brian Bigelow of Leominster. And last but not least is my longtime colleague and trusty co-host, former Wachusett Chess Club champion Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in north central Massachusetts. Hello, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Marty. Well, Marty, today we're going to give our viewers the results of the 2012 U.S. Championship. We did a preview a couple of months ago, but let us tell our viewers who won that championship.
Well, pretty much as we predicted, the favorite, Hikaru Nakamura, 24 years old, now living in St. Louis, who emerged as the winner. He's now the 2012 U.S. champion.
Right.
A field of, how many did we have?
There were 12. It's a round-robin field of 12. And he scored 8.5 points out of possible 11. Right. It was 6 wins and 5 draws. And he was able to do it by defeating the reigning U.S. champion, Gada Kamsky, who had won the championship the last 2 years. And that was actually the decisive game because it put him a point ahead of Kamsky in the final.
His nearest rival, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And as we mentioned in the previous programs, Nakamura, came to the United States at a very young age. He was born in Japan. At the age of 2, he came with his parents to the United States. His mother, who's American, she remarried, and the person she remarried is Nakamura's stepfather is a college classmate of our own Wachusett Chess Club, Ken Gurge of Leominster. They know each other very well. So Nakamura, he started playing chess at the age of 5. And we did a program. Did we do a program where he defeated Arthur Biscard, Grandmaster
right.
and became a master? Nakamura became a master at the age of 10, shortly after his 10th birthday. Well, he's won. This is Nakamura's 3rd U.S. championship victory. He won it at the age of 17 in 2005. He repeated it in 2009, and now this is his 3rd U.S. championship. Now, our director Darren Dame has a very interesting interview that was done at the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis that we're going to run. This is an interview that was done before the tournament started. So let's run this very interesting interview that was done at the playing site.
Okay.
What changed to make you play this year?
Now, as for last year, I chose not to play in large part because of my standing in the world at the time. I was coming off a very big victory, and I felt the need to take a break from chess for a bit to recharge my batteries, per se.
Tell us about the risk-reward of a person who's trying to compete with the elite competition on the world stage and the risk they run in their home U.S. championship when it comes to rating points.
For me, it's not about the rating anymore. A lot has been made about the fact that I'm within 10 points of Bobby Fischer's all-time record as the highest-ranking American. But for me, at this point, it's more about trying to win tournaments. And no matter where you come from, winning your national championship is always very prestigious. And for me, having won the U.S. championship twice, trying to win a 3rd time, perhaps one day I can maybe win 8 or more like Fischer did back in the day. So for me, it's not about the rating, it's about winning ultimately.
And so you're regarding yourself and Gada to be the favorites again this year?
I mean, I think we're the favorites. Ghana has won the last 2 times. When you look at the world rankings, we're the top 2 by quite a wide margin. But I mean, that's why you play chess. That's why you play sports or games in general. Is because if everything was just based on the seedings or who's supposed to be better, then what's the point in having competition at all?
Are there any players whose ratings might belie their actual ability and you think are actually better, especially the younger players?
I mean, all the young players are dangerous. Certainly, Robert Hess. He came very close to winning the year that I won in 2009. Ray Robson as well. He's had quite a run over the past couple of years. And I think maybe the one person who I think could be a dark horse potentially would be Alejandro Ramirez, who emigrated from Costa Rica to the U.S. And I mean, any one of those 3, if they have a good turn, they're able to play consistently, they could all compete for the title here.
Why is it the stronger players like a simple round-robin format?
With the round-robin format, everyone has to play everyone, so there's very, very little luck involved because you play the same players, so you can't really make excuses for complaining about your performance if you don't win.
Great. Thanks very much. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
And that was an interview done with the U.S. champion Hikaru Nakamura at the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of St. Louis. This is an interview before the tournament started. And in that interview, he mentioned Robert Hess. Robert Hess is a 20-year-old, the only American, the only native American-born U.S. Player in this field of 12. All the other players were born outside the United States. But Robert Hess is a student at Yale University, and the game that we're going to present to you today is one that Nakamura won in the first round against Robert Hess. So we should get into this game. We have a photo that was actually taken right at the playing site after Nakamura had played his first move as white. He had just played his king pawn, his e pawn to e4. So this was taken right at the first round of the tournament. So, and we have another photo of a good shot of Robert Hess. Again, he's a student, a 20-year-old student at Yale University, one of the most talented chess players in the country, and I expect great promise out of this player in future years. So let's get into the game. What did Nakamura have in this this first round against Hess?
Well, he played, as we mentioned, he moved the e2, the pawn at e2 to e4, the most common opening that's played, very strong. Opens up diagonals for the queen, and the white squared bishop occupies the center square.
Okay, and Robert Hess, on his move, played the pawn to e5,
right.
Pawn from e7 to e5, which is, this is called a double king pawn opening, but it hasn't quite yet a name.
Yeah, well, it hasn't, no character
No
yet.
character yet.
Right.
All right, so what did Nakamura continue with?
Well, Nakamura chooses to develop his knight on g1 to f3. Again, this is probably the second most common move here.
In the first threat of the game.
Right, and he threatens the e5 pawn.
All right, because the pawn on e5 is attacked, Hess now takes his knight on b8 and defends the pawn by playing it the knight to c6. And this is the most logical response to White's second move. All right, so what did Nakamura do now?
Okay, well, Nakamura chooses one of the oldest openings in the chess repertoire. He takes his bishop on f1 and plays it to c4. He's done this maybe a half a dozen times in his career. It's called the Giuco piano.
Right, which sounds Italian to me.
Yeah, it means go slow. Or,
well, piano means
slow.
We hear it in music. It means
right.
quiet, soft. Yeah. And gioco is the word for game.
Right.
So we're talking a possibility of a quiet game. Now, in this position, Black actually has basically 2 good moves. There's a third move. He could play knight f6, which is known as a 2 knights defense because Black's 2 knights are out, and the knight on f6 is attacking the pawn on e4. But he didn't play that. He could have played the bishop to e7, which is known as the Hungarian defense. He didn't play that. Instead, what Hess played was bishop c5, and now we have the Giuco piano. Okay. Which, by the way, in most of the world is known as the Italian opening, because the Italians really championed this opening. All right, so what did Nakamura do now?
Now, in the past, Nakamura could develop the knight on b1 to c3.
That's a good developing move.
That would be a developing move. what Nakamura has played in the past. He's played the pawn on c2 to c3, planning to play the d pawn up to d4.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
That's a signal. When you see c3, you know that's the
right.
That's
But this time he chooses something quite different.
Yes.
But with the same idea. He takes the b2 pawn and he plays it to b4, attacking the bishop, but it's undefended.
right. Wait a minute. He's offering a pawn.
Right. It's a gambit.
It's a gambit. Now, what is a gambit?
A gambit is a move that he's giving up some material.
Right.
And he's looking to gain a better position from it.
Okay.
You have to, otherwise you're just losing something. If
Exactly.
You don't
And as Wilhelm Steinitz, who was the first official world champion, said more than 100 years ago, the best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. If you don't accept the gambit, how are you going to be able to refute it?
And there also isn't any very good way to not accept it.
Right. And the best way to accept it is to take this pawn with the bishop, not with the knight, because the knight is here protecting this pawn, for one thing. So what Hess did is play bishop takes b4, and now has won a pawn.
Right.
So he's accepted the gambit. So how did Nakamura continue?
Well, and now he plays the pawn on c2 to c3, once again attacking the bishop, forcing it to move one more time.
Right. And this is what we call in chess. We call this in chess gaining a tempo.
Oh, right.
We're gaining time. Tempo meaning time. So that bishop has to move. Now, where can that bishop move to save itself? Well, it could move back to a5. Bishop a5 seems
And that's
logical.
the most common.
Very common move here. We could also play the bishop. Actually, back to c5 is possible, but of course it could be attacked again.
He's going to play d4.
How about if the bishop went back to e7? That's also playable.
It's playable, but
Yeah, and you know what actually looks very illogical is playing the bishop all the way back to f8.
Right,
But would you believe that Steinitz played this move, bishop f8, against the great Russian player, Mikhail Chigorin? We did a program on Mikhail Chigorin. Back in 1882 in Vienna, he played bishop f8, and he redeployed the bishop elsewhere. Anyways, what Hess did when he was attacked with c3, he played the bishop back to d6. Now this looks like something a beginner would play.
right, because it blocks the d
Yes.
pawn. It cramps the position.
Right. It looks something.
And yet, it was at one time considered one of the good responses to this. There's a Boston connection to this move.
There is a Boston connection to this move?
Right. Two players in the late 1800s.
Yes.
Last names are Stone and Ware. I don't recall their first names.
Yeah, it was Henry Stone and
Preston
Preston Ware, yes.
Yeah, they played. This move had earlier been played by Kieseritzky, the European player.
Okay.
But then Stone and Ware sort of worked on it some more. And then it was adopted by Harry Nelson Pillsbury, the great Massachusetts player.
Right, exactly.
And at the great 1895 Hastings tournament,
Yes.
Pillsbury used it, winning twice, once against Schiffers and once against...
With this defense?
With that defense, with that odd-looking move.
Okay. So what did Nakamura do against this odd-looking move,
Well,
bishop
the
d6?
whole purpose of c3 was to play the pawn on d2 to d4, which is what he does.
Right, okay. So what Hess did in response to d4, he plays his queen to e7, further strengthening the defense of this pawn on e5. This is a strong point. He's maintaining a pawn on e5.
Right.
The queen actually just strengthens that point, that strong point. Okay, so what did Nakamura do now?
Well, now the queen's on e7. This is a good time. Nakamura castles,
Right.
bringing his king to safety, but also bringing the rook more towards the center, because eventually he wants to take advantage of that queen's position on the e-file.
All right, so Hess now, on his seventh move, plays the knight on g8 and plays it to f6 with an attack on the pawn on e4. Okay, what did Nakamura do now?
Well, Nakamura could play the rook on f1 to e1 defending, but what he chooses to do first is to develop the knight on b1 to d2 defending the pawn.
Okay, so now that's defended. So now it's time for Hess to castle, and that's what he did. He castled on his eighth move, and his king is now in a safe place.
Right.
That's the purpose of castling, isn't it? To put your king in a safer place?
And to centralize the
centralize the rooks.
Bring the rook in.
Okay. So now what did Nakamura do now?
Well, again, looking at the board, he wants to give some extra. Eventually, all this stuff in the middle is going to clear at some point.
Right.
So you want to have your strong pieces, like the rooks, the queens, on files that potentially will open up, that will support advances in the center of the board. And so he takes the rook on f1 and plays it to e1.
Okay. So, as long as this bishop on d6 is here, black has a problem.
He can't get his pieces out.
Get his pieces out. So what he would like to do is try to maybe make some trades here. So what Hess played now was bishop a3. He comes down to a3. Remember, the queen is protecting it, and he's attacking the bishop on c1.
Right.
But this actually
this is a critical mistake, I think.
Yes, this could be critical. This could be, it could be a mistake.
I think Black, even though he was cramped.
But how was he going to?
Well, he might have.
He was cramped here.
He might have played the rook to b8. He might have
That's
advanced
true.
the b pawn. He might have done a lot of other things.
He had other options.
Right.
All right. So what did Nakamura do against
Well,
this?
he's not going to bother exchanging. He's going to let. This is how many moves has this bishop made? 4 or 5 by this time.
Exactly.
So,
right.
but by taking the bishop away, he's also removed a defender
Yes.
from that pawn. So Nakamura plays knight on f3, takes e5.
All right. So he's now won that pawn. What Hess did now? He took back. He took knight takes e5.
Right.
That's his response.
Right.
All right. So here we have an exchange of knights.
And so, well, he doesn't want to give up a knight. He's going to recapture. D takes the knight on e5, threatening the knight on f6.
And this queen cannot recapture this pawn e5
no.
because this queen is working hard, is overworked,
Right.
because it's protecting the bishop on a3.
Right.
So it's going to force this knight to retreat, and the only move that the knight has is playing back to e8. So this is forced. Knight e8 is the only move that Black had. All right, so how did Nakamura continue here?
So now, at the moment...
now he can be threatening to take the bishop here and then win the pawn. All right, so what?
Plus, they were isolated double pawns. So what?
Yes.
What Nakamura does is he's going to advance the pawn on f2 to f4, basically, solidifying that pawn mass over the king side.
At this point, Hess captures the bishop on c1. Bishop takes c1 is his move.
Right.
All right.
And so finally, after all those moves, that bishop comes off the board because Nakamura recaptures with the rook.
Rook takes c1.
Takes c1. Right.
Okay. All right. So you see now, Nakamura has actually developed all his pieces. All his pieces actually have developed.
Right. There's only actually, if you look at the board, Black has only made a handful of moves.
Yeah.
Whereas there are 7.
But look at the pieces that Black has failed to develop yet.
Right.
So what Hess actually makes a critical decision here. He advances this pawn. Now that this bishop has moved off to d6, he now plays d6.
Right.
He plays the pawn to d6, attacking the pawn on e5.
Right. Well, and this sort of solves some problems for White because these doubled pawns, you generally don't like to have them. They can be a problem, though not necessarily in this configuration. But he's going to trade the pawn. He's going to take the pawn on e5 and take on d6.
Okay.
Threatening the queen.
All right. So now he must recapture the pawn, but the question is, he's got 3 different ways to recapture this pawn.
Right.
He can do it actually with the queen. Mm-hmm. He can do it with the knight.
Threatening the bishop.
And actually, I see nothing wrong with if he had taken with the queen. If he had taken the queen, possibly the pawn would advance and attack the queen again. The same thing would have happened if the knight took it.
Right.
But I think that was the least of the evils.
Right.
Because what Hess played here, he took with the c pawn.
Yeah, that's puzzling.
That is very puzzling because he's actually still has this knight, a bad position here. But he takes with the pawn. C takes d6 is Hess's move.
And the pawn is now isolated. I mean, before he had 2 sets of connected
They were
pawns.
nicely connected.
Right.
Now with this
becomes
capture,
a target.
It's a target.
Right.
Okay. Now what did Nakamura do now?
Well, basically he develops his knight on d2 to f3, opening up a slight attack on that pawn, and putting the knight onto a more aggressive space.
Okay.
Preparing an advance on e5.
All right. So what Hess played here, he could have what he did was he played bishop g4 and pins the knight.
Pins the knight.
Okay,
right.
so what did Nakamura do in response to this?
He's not going to allow that pin to stay there. He advances the pawn on h2 to h3, threatening the bishop.
Right, so he's putting the question to the bishop right away.
Right.
Now the bishop cannot retreat back to h5. Why not? Is that a bad retreat?
Because the pawn on g2 can be advanced to g4, threatening it again,
forcing back here,
and then pushing to f5.
And the bishop
you're going to lose it for.
So that would lose the bishop.
Right.
All right. So he's got to make a decision. When this is under attack, he either has to retreat the bishop back, but he chooses not to retreat the bishop. Instead, he exchanges.
But first.
I'm sorry. No.
He
didn't.
He makes a counter threat.
That's right. He did not actually take back. He actually, a counter threat, he now develops this rook on the c file, plays it to c8, and attacks the bishop on c4. Yes, you're right. He a little suspicion soup.
Yeah,
in between move here.
He wants to be careful. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to move the queen, for instance, to defend the bishop, because then if if he takes, then he has to open up his king.
He'd have to take with
position.
the pawn.
Yeah,
right.
that's not good. You don't want to expose the king.
Right.
So he simply retreats the bishop to bishop 3. Now the bishop is still under attack.
Right. And now he has two choices: either to retreat the bishop or to take the knight, and he chose to capture the knight. Bishop takes f3 was his move. Right,
and then he recaptures with the queen, which is he put the queen on a good space and that good aggressive space there, rather than opening up by taking with the pawn, which he could have. It would have exposed the king to a check from the queen, and it could have gotten messy.
So here is where Hess now activates this rook which he had put on the c file, and brings it to c5. And see here, this rook cannot be attacked. Because there's no dark square bishop to attack, there's no knight.
Yeah.
So it's safe here on c5, and he's going to try to maybe double these. Maybe if he can get this knight into play, maybe bring the other rook over onto the c file.
It gives the rook a lot of scope back and forth.
It does.
And
more range, more scope.
And for much the same reason, Nakamura responds by taking the rook on e1 and playing e3.
Right.
He maintains it on the file, but he also gives it more scope along. He can move, there's more places he can go to.
Okay. So now this poor knight, which had to retreat early in the game, now is Hess plays to c7. Knight c7 is his 19th move, and that's what he does.
And so now it's time for Nakamura. When you're in a position like this, at some point you need to start your attack. They've been jockeying their pieces around, but now that Black has been able to open up his position, Nakamura really has to start. If he wants to take advantage of his position, he needs to start his attack. So he advances the pawn on e4 to e5.
Right. And what Hess does, what he does is he captures the e-pawn. D takes e5. He just takes back like this. D takes e5. Right.
Now the queen comes down.
Oh, so actually it opened up for the queen to come down?
Yeah.
By advancing e5, the queen now is able to come right down and win this b-pawn.
The b7 pawn, right?
Queen takes b7, and isn't he threatening to win the a-pawn?
Right, he's threatening to win another pawn, right?
All right, and because he's threatening to win the a-pawn, Hess now plays the a-pawn to a5. So a5 saves the a-pawn.
So the queen's job is done, comes back, queen to e4.
And maintains this pin. But again, this pawn certainly cannot take that pawn because it would lose the queen outright. All right, so with the queen on e4, now it's time to move this knight on c7 to e6, and that's what he did. He played knight. Now where is this knight going here?
Well, he's threatening to take the f4 pawn.
Yes, he's attacking the pawn. Also opens up for maybe the rook to come over and double the rooks with pressure on the c file.
Right.
All right, so what did
Nakamura takes? He's not going to bother trying to defend this anymore. He's going to simply trade it. The f takes the e4 pawn.
All right. So now,
e5 pawn, I should say.
Now, if we can put pieces lined up against this isolated e pawn could be a bone in Black's throat. So he plays the rook to e8. He plays the rook.
He's piling up.
He's piling up. He's going to pile up on that e pawn.
Right.
All right. So by playing rook e8.
Right.
So now what does Nakamura do?
Well, he's not going to come. He's not going to trade. He could.
What was he accomplished by playing the rook over behind? He's not going anywhere.
Right. Nothing's going to happen.
Nothing's going to happen with the rook on the.
But he moves the rook from c1 to d1. We call this an open file. There's no other pieces on there.
Right.
And should there be any kind of exchanges going on, there's the distant threat of a possible back rank. In other words, if there's no defender on that back rank, he could get mated by this rook.
Okay. So at this point, Hess now plays the queen from e7 to c7, and now has a double attack on the pawn on c3, threatening to win that pawn.
Right. So Nakamura is going to defend that pawn by advancing the rook on d1 to d3.
Right. Okay. Now here is another move which is suspect. What Hess played, he played the pawn on h7 to h6, creating himself a
Just a
little,
little running room
little what they call in
Luft.
German Luft,
Yeah, right.
little air, to,
Right.
to escape. But that actually may be a mistake.
Yeah, kind of a wasted move. It doesn't.
I mean, he could have actually brought the knight to G5, attack the
G5,
queen, and then if the queen moves, the knight could move back.
Yeah, he had a lot of better.
He had some options, but he chose to play H6.
Right.
All right, so what did Nakamura do now?
Okay, well, he's going to bring his bishop into play. He's going to play the bishop now that's been on B3. He's going to centralize it, bring it up to the D5 square.
Okay.
It's sufficiently protected. There's nothing. So he's posting it in onto a better square.
All right. At this point, Hess plays the queen to B6. He's actually, you see how on this diagonal he's on this, where this rook is actually pinned,
Right.
if this black rook were ever to move. But the idea is also, he's
gonna
also
have a check,
threatening
right.
he's threatening a check on B1. But does he really want to be checking down here? Shouldn't he stick around here to be
it seems that would.
He should be staying here to
Yeah, I mean,
defend.
all the threats are over here. He should be doing something about that. And so Nakamura strengthens his bishop's position. He advances the pawn to C4, adds extra protection,
Anchors
blocks
it
the
down.
rook, and
Right.
blocks the rook from coming down.
Exactly.
Frees up these rooks. This is no longer threatened by anything.
Right.
I mean, there was always the threat if these moved that he might be able to take it.
So at this point, Hess decided to come down with the check. He actually, what he should have done is probably come back with the queen here. See, he should have stayed close to home.
He could have still threatened the queen with the G5. There's a lot.
Right, yes, right. At this point, he could have played knight G5, attack the queen, force the queen, and then come back again with the knight.
Right.
But instead, he comes down to B1 with the check.
Yeah.
All right, so queen B1 check.
And that's nothing. The king on G1 simply goes to H2. He's safe. There's no.
He's
big-
hiding.
he's hiding.
Perfectly safe place
Right.
right there. So at this point, Hess now becomes greedy. He goes into pawn grabbing and grabs the pawn on A2. So queen takes A2. He takes the pawn.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he doesn't see what the threats are.
I mean, the pawns are materially.
He has an outside pass.
Yeah, so he
pawn.
does have a pass pawn.
Yeah.
Well, is that pawn?
He doesn't have time.
Not enough time
Right.
to advance that pawn
Right.
for another queen.
So
here he is. The queen is out of play over here on the queen side,
Right.
where he's needed to be on the king side here. So what did Nakamura
First
do?
of all, he eliminates the knight. Bishop take on E6.
Right. And now on this capture, what this prevents is that Hess cannot recapture with the rook. Why? Why
Because
does rook takes
that
E6?
back rank we talked about earlier.
Yeah, because the rook would come down to E8, D8 check, and he'd only delay the checkmate by bringing the rook back to E8,
Right.
and then the rook. Yeah, it'd be checkmate. It would be checkmate.
checkmate.
So therefore, on this position, this is here, right?
Right.
So when he took here, on this capture on bishop takes, he must take with the pawn.
Right.
So F takes E6
So he brings the rook down to the 7th.
Ooh, very dangerous to put a rook on the 7th. And what White is threatening is bring the queen to G6
Right.
with the mate threat.
Right.
So what Hess does, he anticipates that and plays king H8, so he could probably bring the rook over to
defend.
G8
Right.
to defend that pawn.
But because of the position of the rooks, Nakamura can sacrifice this rook by taking on G7.
And now he's threatening mate
Now
on
he's threatening
with the
right-
queen
right on the next move. So he has to-
So he has to accept the sacrifice.
to take it.
So he plays king takes G7.
Okay.
And how
Now
does
the
Nakamura
rook
continue?
slides over to G3 check.
Right, and he cannot go back to H8 here. He can't go to H8.
No, because the queen
The
here
queen would go to
will mate on the next
mate
move.
on taking the pawn on H6. So he goes to F8. King F8 is Hess's move.
Right, and then he plays the queen to H7, and it will be mate on the next move no matter.
And there's
no
two.
matter what.
Is he threatening two different ways to checkmate?
Yeah.
We have the mate with the rook down to G8 check,
Right.
and we also have queen G7 check.
Yeah, so
So
either way-
Hess threw in the towel. So chess fans, I hope you enjoyed this game that Hikaru Nakamura won round 1, U.S. champion. He is our new U.S. champion, his 3rd U.S. championship. We'll see you next time for the next edition of Chess Chat. Stay tuned.